20 years. That's how long this dog waited. Not weeks, not months. 20 years lying in filth, covered in parasites, too weak to stand while the entire world moved on and forgot about the man who raised him. And when that man finally came home, disguised, unrecognizable to his own wife, his own son, his own servants, this dying animal on a pile of dung lifted its head, wagged its tail, and knew him instantly. Then it died. That's not a myth. That's one of the oldest stories ever written, and this painting captures the exact moment it happened. This is Argos and Odysseus, painted by Briton Rivière around 1885. And if you've ever loved an animal, this painting might be the hardest thing you look at all day. Let's start with what we see. On the right stands a man, barefoot, wearing a torn and ragged tunic with a rough animal skin bag slung over his shoulder. His posture is heavy. His head is tilted downward, his gaze fixed on the ground. Everything about him says exhaustion, defeat, poverty. He looks like a beggar, and that's exactly the point. This man is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, hero of the Trojan War, the most cunning man in all of Greek mythology. But no one is supposed to know that. He has returned home after 20 years disguised as a wandering stranger, and his mission depends on no one recognizing him. On the left, lying on sun-warmed stone near a marble column, is a dog. Not a strong, proud hunting dog, a skeleton wrapped in skin. You can count every rib. His legs are thin, his body wasted, his once powerful frame reduced to almost nothing. Around him, weeds push through the cracked pavement. A grapevine climbs the column beside him, still alive, still growing. A quiet contrast to the creature dying at its base. And yet, even in this state, the dog's eyes are open. He looks up at the man standing before him with a kind of recognition that goes beyond sight. He knows. This is Argos. Behind them both, the sea stretches out toward a pale blue horizon, soft and infinite. The setting is a terrace of Odysseus' own palace, once grand, now neglected, just like the dog, just like the kingdom, just like everything Odysseus left behind 2 decades ago. Rivière chose a muted palette for the entire scene. Dusty golds, faded whites, washed out blues. Nothing screams for your attention. Everything whispers. And that restraint is what makes the painting so devastating. The story comes from Book 17 of Homer's Odyssey, written nearly 3,000 years ago. Odysseus has finally reached Ithaca after 10 years of war at Troy, and then 10 more years lost at sea, battling monsters, gods, and his own fate. But he can't just walk through his front door. His palace has been overrun by suitors, men who believe he's dead and who are competing to marry his wife Penelope and take his throne. If Odysseus reveals himself too soon, he'll be killed. So the goddess Athena disguises him as an old beggar. He approaches his own home with his swineherd Eumaeus, and on the way they pass a heap of dung where animals have been neglected. Lying there is Argos. Homer tells us that Odysseus raised Argos as a puppy. He trained him, he loved him, but he never got to take him hunting. He left for Troy before the dog was fully grown. For 20 years, young men used Argus for chasing wild goats and deer and hares. But once Odysseus was presumed dead, nobody cared anymore. The dog was abandoned, left to rot. And yet, when Odysseus walks past, Argos does something no human in the poem can do. He recognizes his master immediately. Homer writes that the dog dropped his ears and wagged his tail, but he no longer had the strength to move closer. Odysseus sees him. He understands what has happened. And according to Homer, he turns his head so Eumaeus won't notice and wipes away a tear. He cannot pet the dog. He cannot kneel beside him. He cannot say his name, because doing any of that would give away who he is. So the man who sailed across the world, who outwitted a cyclops and resisted the song of the sirens, who survived everything the gods threw at him, this man stands there, powerless, watching the one creature in the world that still knows him die at his feet. And that is exactly what Rivière painted. Briton Rivière was born in London in 1840 into a family of artists. His father was a drawing professor at Oxford, and from a young age, Rivière showed an unusual fixation, not with portraits of nobles or grand historical battles, but with animals. They became the center of his entire career. While other Victorian painters chased prestige through human subjects, Rivière made animals the absolute protagonists of his work. He spent countless hours observing them, in zoos, in nature, even studying their bodies in dissection rooms to understand every muscle, every gesture. He was admitted into the Royal Academy as a distinguished member, and his reputation was built almost entirely on the emotional depth he could give to creatures most painters treated as background decoration. Now, we've already explored his most famous work on this channel, Daniel in the Lion's Den, where Rivière brought 7 lions to life with such individual personality that critics considered it his masterpiece. But while that painting shows the power of animals restrained by the divine, this one shows something completely different. This one shows love restrained by circumstance. And somehow, that's even harder to witness. What Rivière understood, what Homer understood 3,000 years before him, is that the most heartbreaking moments aren't the loud ones. They're the ones where two beings recognize each other and can do absolutely nothing about it. Argos can't walk to Odysseus. Odysseus can't acknowledge Argos. They are separated by a few feet of stone and an entire war's worth of disguise and strategy. The reunion happens entirely in silence, entirely in the eyes. And then Argos dies. Homer gives the dog a hero's death, using the same formal language reserved for fallen warriors on the battlefield. That was intentional. In a poem full of gods and monsters and epic bloodshed, Homer chose to honor a dying dog with the dignity of a soldier, because Argos earned it. 20 years of waiting is its own kind of war. There's something about this story that reaches past mythology and touches something very real. Anyone who has ever come home after a long absence and been greeted by an animal that never stopped waiting understands what this painting is about. It's not really about ancient Greece. It's about the kind of loyalty that doesn't ask questions, doesn't keep score, and doesn't fade, even when everything else does. I think that's why Rivière painted it with such tenderness. No drama, no blood, no spectacle. Just a man and a dog standing in the ruins of a life that used to be theirs, sharing one final moment that neither of them can hold on to. If this painting moved you, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And if it reminded you of someone, a person, an animal, a bond you once had, tell me about that too. Those are the stories that matter most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.